I love horror. I grew up, watching horror things my parents probably shouldn't have let me see. But in my generation, the new movies were Halloween and Friday the 13th. Those were just emerging, and Nightmare on Elm Street. So I'm a horror fan. As a kid, I grew up reading Stephen King, and Pet Sematary was one of those things. So for me, it was personal because I was a fan, and it was something from my childhood that left an indelible image. So and I think also this story, is more than just a horror tale. What's unusual about it is it's got real human drama. It's about grief and tragedy, family tragedy, dynamics I think everybody understand. I didn't know at the time that I read this, when you boil this down, I didn't know what a zombie was. I didn't know about, resurrection. Subsequently, you go on with your education. When you're a kid, you don't know about Lazarus, rising from the dead. And you don't know that this is a theme that runs through a lot of historic literature and the idea of coming back. You don't, as a kid, you don't have that sense of the finality of death. So I don't think that part of it resonated probably for me as a kid. What you really think about is your cat. Everybody has dreamt of directing Pet Sematary, and they all have a completely different idea of what that movie is in their head. With Dennis and Kevin, they had such clarity about what was significant about the book. They had such clarity about Stephen King and why people loved his stuff. And, they're writers and directors, which was actually great for us because they knew the book inside out. They knew what was missing from our script that was critical for the fans, and just what was great in the book that we'd have to find a way to put into it. I do believe that this is a story, Pet Sematary is a story about grief, and it's also a story about a doctor, who thinks he understands the meaning of death, only to realize, to be put in the shoes of his patients, or to be put on the other side of the table, and to understand that he knew nothing at all about, the struggles of, people's families, and losing loved ones. I mean, it's really his journey to understand what it means to lose somebody forever. Amy has turned out to be like the greatest, revelation in this movie. We knew her, I knew her really as a writer and a director. She conveys a great sense of warmth, and you really like her as a person, and at the same time she's able to do all the dark, tragic, grieving, sort of exhausting stuff. We're all familiar with him. He's a a well-known star, but he is the center of this movie. This is somebody who had to convey all of the horrific grief of a father losing a child, and at the same time the optimism that the character requires to try this thing, to this experiment, to bring this girl back and be completely swept up in the spell of, and it really is a spell, the magic of this, and then he has to flip back again and convey anger, and they're great as a couple. They work really well together, and again, Jason's somebody who really thinks his stuff through. Jate, in the role of Ellie, is the linchpin of the movie, and we auditioned a lot of girls for that part, and there's two very, for a little kid, right, to do all of this stuff that's incredibly emotional and layered. She was controlled, and like, she was the one person who went the other way, and she would sort of like clench her body and, like tilt her head, and like, we have this scene where you're stabbing Jud or whatever, and everyone's like, ah, and she was like clenched and like slow, like, and you were like, she was the one person you were watching, and you're like, I'm actually scared by this 9-year-old girl. Like, there's something crazy going on inside her. I'm so glad that we found her. She's remarkable. The guy's first choice always was John Lithgow, and we all think of him, he's kind, considerate, talks to everybody, but he is sort of also the glue that holds the set together, right? Because he really connects to everybody and takes the time to get to know everyone's name and all that stuff. He is the keeper of the mythology of this movie, right? That character, Jud. And just because of his cadence, because of the intonation, and the expressiveness of his face, just his body language, he sells something that isn't easy to buy. The idea that there's a secret pet cemetery we can bury stuff, or a secret beyond the pet cemetery, and it comes back to life, right? And again, that's the validity of this as a movie, as a story, as something you'd even bother to go see. And you can't say enough about him. He is one of the great actors of our time.